Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, ciao, bonjour, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jedley. I am so happy to welcome you to Reading with Your Kids. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so very honored and so delighted that you're joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. We do that by sharing fun, thoughtful, and thought-provoking conversations with fascinating people who just happen to be writing for kids of all ages. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show and let them know that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network, and they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Good Pods, wherever you find your podcasts. Two really fascinating people on the show today. A little bit later on, we are going to be welcoming Healey Ikerd into the show to talk about The Red Ball, a story of friendship and forgiveness. But first up, we travel to New York City to speak to the author of Emerson Page, Where the Light Leads, great middle grade novel, from our first guest, Christa Avampato. Join us right now from the beautiful city of New York. Our guest is returning to Reading with Your Kids to celebrate the brand new book in her Emerson Page series. It's called Where the Light Leads. Please welcome back to the show my friend, Christa Avampato. Christa, how are you?
Jed, I'm so happy to be with you. This just makes my whole year be with you.
You know, Christa was was a guest very early on in the life of the podcast. Probably definitely in the first or second year. Maybe, I think maybe in the first. And we became friends. And, one of the reasons I love doing this podcast is because I've met so many people who've become friends. And it really is neat, and it really is a blessing. And your series is a great middle grade series that I think brings a lot of blessings and hopes to the readers.
Yes, thank you so much. I love writing about her. She really feels like a real person to me, like she's a part of my life. I walk around New York City with her in mind, and when I see things, I imagine what she would think if she was seeing them, and she's a spirit that's really ever present with me, and I feel so lucky and so grateful that I get to write her story.
Now, how did you meet Emerson?
So Emerson came to me from a really difficult time that I had. I was struggling with a lot of mental health issues. I had an apartment building fire that had happened in New York. I almost got trapped in the building. I lost almost everything I owned, and I had a lot of really difficult emotions coming out of that. And I went into therapy. I was really trying to recover and doing everything I could to try to recover, but I was really struggling a lot. And I was really having a tough time sleeping. I was having lots of nightmares. And one night I sat straight up in bed. I'd had a nightmare. It was very frightening to me. And it was a full moon, and it was blaring into my bedroom. This beautiful, gorgeous moon was huge. And I went over to the window, and where I lived at the time, there were these huge, beautiful water towers that were on top of the buildings, the apartment buildings, which is very iconic in New York, especially on the west side of Manhattan where I lived at the time. And with the moon behind them and these water towers, I had this character come into my mind of, at the time, it was actually a boy. Emerson was not a girl when she started. It was a boy at the time, and his name was James, and he came into my imagination somehow at that moment, and was someone who had lived through a difficult time but was going to make it out. And as I started to explore that, I found, oh wait, not a boy, a girl. Okay, not James, but Emerson. And that story, writing her story of, she was so brave. And when people say, oh, or is Emerson you? I think Emerson is who I aspire to be. Uh-huh. She's the best of me, like the best, the best version of me that I could be. And I want to be like that. I want to be as brave as she is. I want to be somebody who stands up for people the way that she stands up for people and the way that she stands up for herself. And she's basically a heart with legs that's walking around a difficult world trying to get through. And really writing that story and writing this book, I think in many ways that therapy was extraordinarily helpful, of course, in getting through my mental health challenges and PTSD. But writing this story was a huge part of that healing process for me. And to me, and you know this with the work that you do, that creativity and the imagination have their own healing powers for all of us.
Absolutely. It sounds like your imagination knew exactly what you needed at that moment.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely right. I think that there are so many ways that we can care for ourselves, you know, our minds, our bodies, our spirits. And I do think if we can sit in the quiet and let ourselves really absorb what it is our bodies and our minds, our spirits are trying to tell us, what the universe is trying to tell us, I do think that there are a lot of answers there. I definitely needed the therapy and the professional help. And as you know, I had a little dog up until January, and he was my emotional support dog who came into my life around the same time that Emerson came into my life. And he inspired the character of Friday, who's Emerson's dog in the book. And that's by no accident. He is her service dog and her emotional support dog, and helps her through these difficult times the same way that my dog Phineas helped me. So in that way, our stories really mirrored each other too.
That's beautiful. And as a friend, it was wonderful seeing the relationship you had with Phineas.
Oh, thank you.
And you know, he seemed like a very special little guy, and I know he meant a lot to you. And I'm really sorry that you lost him, but
yeah,
he's still there with you.
He is. I feel him here all the time.
Yeah.
He is so present in my life, and I know he's still working in my life and still helping me. And one of the things that was so tough for me was we used to go on these little adventures together in New York City, and we would go around to different neighborhoods, and we'd go to different festivals and parties and places. He was a very social dog. He loved other dogs. He loved other people. He had a few cat friends, a few bird friends. And he was very distinctive. He was a wire-haired dachshund, so he was very, he was adorable, and he was just so friendly, and he was very iconic looking, I thought. And so people would come running up to him, oh, can I say hi to your dog? Can I say hi to your dog? And I'm like, oh, of course. And he loved it. He would just lap up the attention. And one of the things when he passed was I was so sad that we weren't going to go on any more adventures together. That was something that was so difficult for me. Of not only would I miss the times I had with him, but I had so many other things I wanted us to do together, despite the fact that, you know, he was with me for 13 and a half years. He was 14 and a half when he passed, which is a ripe old age for a dachshund, and especially for a dachshund who had many, many, many health issues his whole life. And what I realize now is that he's actually still with me. In a couple of days, I'm going to go to the UK for a month, and Phineas will be there with me in some form. And so our love story continues, even though he's not here in the same way that he was. And I miss him every single day. And I kind of expected at some point, I thought, well, I wonder when I'm going to heal, or I wonder when it won't be like so painful anymore. And what I realize now is that I'm just learning how to carry it a little bit different. I will always miss him.
Yeah.
And he really was my soul dog, and I was meant for him, and he was meant for me. Yeah. And I was so lucky. And now in September, I'm actually going to start fostering dogs in his honor, which I'm so excited about. And to be able to help other people find their Phineas is really important to me, and a great way to honor him.
That's wonderful. Well, we should talk about the story that we're going to encounter when we read Where the Light Leads.
Yes. So Emerson, when her first book ended, Emerson Page and Where the Light Enters, she had discovered that she was related to the muses who inspire creativity in all of us. There is a book, which was the first book that was ever written, which contains all the secrets to human imagination and human creativity that her mother had been looking for. Her mother passes away before the series starts, and the entire series is really based on her carrying on her mother's legacy moving forward. And in the second book, she has an idea of where the book is that her mother was looking for, and it turns out that it's in Ireland. She spends half of the book in New York City, kind of getting ready for her trip and learning things that she needs to learn, and then she spends the second half of the book in Ireland. And I was fortunate enough to go to Ireland to get to do the research there. So all of the places that Emerson goes are inspired by places that I went when I was on my trip in Ireland in 2018. And I don't know if you've ever been to Ireland. I find that it is one of the most magical places I have ever been. The people are delightful, and it was just an absolutely perfect place for her to go in this next adventure. She encounters a lot of folklore and myths and mysteries that are all part of the Irish heritage and Irish culture, and she goes to lots of different iconic places that anybody who knows Ireland or has been there will immediately recognize them. And that was something that was really important to me, because the whole series is really about how does the magical world live alongside our world that we live in every day, and how do the two kind of blend together. And so I'm really excited that this next chapter of her story is out in the world.
That's wonderful. I haven't been to Ireland yet. Yes. And that's not just my positive mindset. We're actually, my beautiful wife and I are going in September.
What a great time.
With the parents of my daughter's fiance. And we're landing in Scotland and getting on a bus and going to end up somewhere in Ireland and come back on a plane, I hope. And so we're really looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. One of the things I did when I was at the International Children's Book Festival in Bologna, Italy, was speaking to a woman who works for the Irish government promoting literacy. And she was sharing the same thing about all the stories and the myths and the places. And she said we need to bring a raincoat and an umbrella because it's going to rain a lot. But Ireland seems like a pretty magical place.
Yes, and it really is known as the country of books and the country of literature. And that is ever present in their story. No matter who you meet in that country, they have a story to tell you. They can't wait to tell you about it. They will talk your ear off all day about it. And I just find that they are some of the warmest, kindest, loveliest people I've ever met. I felt so lucky to be there doing that research. And people ask me why did Emerson end up in Ireland? Like, what led her there? And it really was this idea of Ireland being a land of books. And my goodness, if she was looking for a book, that would be the place that she should start out. So I'm so excited that you're going to get to be there. I'm also going to Scotland next month as well, and that's another fantastic place to be. Also a very storied place, and actually very close in many ways in heritage to Ireland. So the Irish and the Scots get on quite well together. Yeah. So I'm sure you're going to absolutely love it there. I'm so excited.
One of the questions that comes to my mind is, how in the world did you find the time to write Where the Light Leads while you're working towards your doctorate?
Yes, so I'm working on my dissertation. I'll finish my dissertation at the end of July, so that'll be my master's dissertation, and then I'm hoping to go on from there. So I'm very excited. It has been, it's been a balance, and definitely the time that the book came under contract actually over 2 years ago, but publishing timelines, as you know, are very long. Mm-hmm. It takes a long time for a book to, even though the manuscript was as good as I could get it on my own when the book was acquired by the publisher. There was a lot of editing that went into it. You know, there are many hands make a published book. And so it took a long time to get through that process. And in that same time, I started this graduate school program. And then as luck would have it, really the massive amount of work that I was doing for the dissertation and the massive amount of work that I had to do for the book were happening at the exact same time. And I also work full time as well for Carnegie Hall. So it was a lot happening all at once. And for me, I really try to stay as organized as possible. I live by my Google Calendar, and so I really block out time in there. And I also felt like the work that I do for my dissertation is actually based in climate change, although my dissertation is all about using storytelling to promote climate change. So it was very much about writing and about storytelling and crafting story. So the fact that I got to spend an entire year intensely studying storytelling to save our planet and to save nature, for me, was such a joy to get to do, the same way that it was a real joy to get to write Emerson's second book. So I always feel, for me, that my work gives me much more energy than it takes away. It doesn't mean that I don't get tired or that I don't need a break, but for me, it gives me so much and enriches my life so much to be doing this work that I wouldn't have it any other way. And I feel extraordinarily lucky that I'm here at all, and very lucky that I get to do this work. So for me, it's always something that I have a tremendous amount of gratitude for, to be able to do.
You know, I'm interested. I'm reminded, as you're talking about your study of story and how to use story to protect the planet. I had an opportunity while we were in Bologna. The Italian government sponsored a dozen African publishers to come to the event, and they were staying in the hotel with us. So we got very close, and had a really wonderful time. Not only with the folks from the Italian government, but also from these publishers from Rwanda and Uganda and Kenya. And one of the things that they shared with me is they're all working really hard to try to build a culture of reading aloud with kids within families in Africa. And it struck me as strange because I said to them, I said, but isn't there a big storytelling tradition in Africa? And they said, yes. And all these families that they're working with, they tell stories all the time, but they don't read aloud. And interestingly, I spoke to an author in most northern Ontario that is working in a First Nation community, and he is experiencing the same thing. I'm just mentioning that to you because I'm wondering if that connects with something that you learned in your studies. I find it fascinating.
Yes, that is fascinating because storytelling is so much a part of how so many communities throughout history pass down their personal stories, their mythology, their religion. A lot of it is based on story. And it's also the thing about storytelling and why it's so, I call it, humanity's first job was the storyteller, right? It always has been. And when we didn't have writing, when people didn't have access to books, but always what they had was the campfire, right? Always what they had was storytelling. And our minds are actually primed. Our brains are neurologically primed to take in story much more than we could take in. If somebody gives you 100 data points, you'll remember a couple of them. But if those data points are embedded into a story, you're much more likely to be able to recall them later. And that was really something that my studies were about, is that idea of that power of storytelling. Because sometimes, as you know, sometimes we read books and like the storytelling isn't all that great, right? Like we'd rather hear something that's told around a campfire. And I find that the books that really stay with me are the ones that actually really focus on that craft of storytelling. And they set up a memorable scene so that we can literally see it happening in our minds as we're reading it. I think it's so interesting that these publishers are also trying to get reading aloud to be something that's a part of the culture. And I wonder, for me, I wonder if a lot of these communities maybe haven't had access to books. We are spoilt for books in this country, right? I mean, thank goodness for people like Andrew Carnegie and others who really prioritize public libraries as something that every community needs to have. And that's not true everywhere in the world. People can't just go and get books anytime they want down the street. I mean, my library is 3 blocks from my New York City apartment, right? And then there's a huge library, maybe half an hour away, but we're so lucky that we have access to libraries in this country, and not every place does. And so I really applaud them for trying to build up that type of community. I think it's so important, and I really hope that they can be successful, and I'd really love to be able to help them too.
Yeah.
So that sounds like something that I should look into to see if there's something that I can do that would be helpful.
Well, we'll talk about that. Speaking of helpful, oftentimes we ask authors what kind of conversations we can have when we're reading a book, a co-reading book with our kids. And I'm certainly interested in what you think about that. But I'm thinking, Emerson has been such a good therapist for you.
Yeah.
You have such a great positive outlook on life, despite the very difficult times that you've faced, some that you've shared and some that you haven't. And but you still remain positive and have a bright personality and a bright spirit. And from what you're telling us today, Emerson is a big reason for that. So I'm thinking that this series might be the perfect series to bring to your kid if they're struggling with anxiety or depression or some kind of thing, because it's not specifically not a self-help book. I think a lot of kids who are struggling, the last thing they need is Dr. Phil's How to Feel Better. I don't want to get on Dr. Phil. It's just, that those self-help books. But to meet a courageous young woman like Emerson, who struggles and is able to get through it, I think would be pretty inspiring.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people who read this book with their kids, or I've had some people who have come to me and they've said, look, my child is really struggling. I know that Emerson struggles in the story. I really want to read this book with them. Do you think it's appropriate for them? And I absolutely feel that one of the reasons that I wrote the book is that I wanted people to feel less alone when they read it, whether they were an adult like me who's trying to get through a difficult time, or they were a kid too who's really trying who feels alone or feels sad or feels lonely, even if they aren't alone, which is the worst kind of loneliness. And in my opinion, I've felt that way a lot in my life. And for me, that was the whole reason that I wanted to write this book, is that if there's this beautiful saying that if you have been fortunate enough to be able to find freedom, then you should use that gift to help free others. And that's how I feel about this story. I feel very much like I was fortunate to come through cancer. I was fortunate to come through PTSD. I was fortunate to come through lots of trauma in my life, and I have a really beautiful life that I love now. It was hard won, but I really treasure the life that I have. And one of the things that I feel it's really important for me to do is to help other people know when they're going through a tough time that they can also get through and they can also persevere, and not just like, hang in there, you'll be okay, but also here's how. Yep. Here's what helps. And so Emerson, especially in this book, she has a few scenes where she shares things that she does because she suffers from massive anxiety because of the loss of her mother. And it can actually be very dangerous for her to lose control because of some magical abilities that she has. And so it is paramount for her to be able to control her mind and control her thoughts and be able to stay, not that she doesn't feel big emotions, she does, and not that she doesn't have anxiety, but she has tools that she learns and tools she uses to be able to manage through it. And she's taught those tools by several other characters in the book. And so I also hope that in some ways the tools that she uses they're actually tools that anybody can use when they're feeling anxiety. And that was really important for me to bring forward in this second book. Something that I do for young people, I always thought it would be so cool to get a letter when I was younger from, characters that I admired in a book, something that would arrive. So one thing I do is when someone says, oh, my child's reading this book and they really love it, I have some people who their kids have cosplayed Emerson as part of like World Book Day and things like that, which is so exciting and so cool to see. And so one thing that I do, if they reach out to me, I say, hey, send me the child's name and what address I can send something to. And I send a handwritten note from Emerson and Friday, and I send them a little gift, which is this metal bookmark that I make especially for them that has little charms on it that are reminiscent of things that are in the book, because I want to encourage their love of reading. And I write them an encouraging letter. And one woman reached out to me and said, my niece is going through a really bad time. She's really, really struggling. She's about 11, and I really want to give her this book. Is there anything that I should know about it, or, do you think this would be a good fit? And I said, definitely would be, here's what you need to know about the book and some of the themes that are in it. And also, let me send you a letter and a gift. Well, she gives this book to her niece, and the letter arrives, and she gives it all as a package for her niece for her birthday. And she said that her niece keeps falling asleep with the book, in her bed. She feels so comforted by the story and by Emerson's perseverance that she's actually falling asleep with it, and it's really helping her. And that just makes me so happy. Another mom reached out to me recently that her son went through a really difficult health challenge recently that they're still trying to get through, and he's still struggling through it. And so she got him the books, and I sent off a letter and a gift for him, and he loves it too. So also something that I like to say about the book is sometimes people say oh, is it really a girl story? And just because she's a girl doesn't mean that boys won't love it. And so a lot of people have said, oh, I like it even more than Percy Jackson. Oh, this is it, because there's a real adventurous spirit to her. And she does go on these adventures, whether in New York City or in Ireland or into her magical worlds that she's a part of. And so it does have that element that it resonates with boys as well as with girls.
That's fantastic. Well, it makes sense because I think all kids can relate to powerful, not perfect, but powerful characters who see a challenge and are brave and go for it. And that's what Emerson's all about.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is what she's just going to go for it. She has a couple of scenes. One person said to me, they were reading the book, an adult reading the book, and she's like, oh, I love the story so much. She's like, but I was really worried about her a couple of times. She does some things that are very impulsive. And I was like, no, don't do that. You're going to get hurt. What are you doing? And so there are times that we are as people, and certainly as teenagers, can be very impulsive, and she is not perfect. And she does do things that, maybe if she took a couple deep breaths, felt is that a good idea? Although maybe she would just go for it anyway. But there's a couple points, especially in the second book too, where she does really just go for it. And her friends that are with her are trying to talk her out of doing something. And she's really determined that she's going to do it. And she convinces them to kind of come along with her and support her and follow her in this crazy chance that she's going to take, and they get themselves in trouble, but they also get themselves out, which is good.
That's awesome. Christa, we should tell everybody where they can go to find out more about Emerson Page, Where the Light Leads, and more about you.
Yes, absolutely. So a couple places. My personal website is ChristaAvampato.com, all one word. Everything I do is on that website. Emerson Story also has its own website, and it's emersonpagebook.wordpress.com. And there are links there to buy the book. There's information about the story, events that I have coming up, and then certainly on social media. I'm on Facebook as author Christa. I also am on Twitter as Christa NYC, and then also on Instagram as Christa Rose NYC. And then Emerson also has her own Instagram. I am Emerson Page.
Awesome.
There. So lots of different ways to find it. And certainly I think the easiest place to buy the book is on Amazon if people want it delivered to them, but it's available everywhere books are sold. You might have to order it at your local bookstore or at your library, but they can order it for you. And certainly, all the information is on Amazon as well. So you could give that to a bookstore and they'd be able to find it to buy it there too.
Wonderful. We've had a really great time speaking to the author of Emerson Page, Where the Light Leads. Are we going to see book number 3?
Yes, so this publisher actually already contracted for book number 3. And I'm very excited about that. And that'll be, I think for now, that'll probably be the capstone on her journey, where a lot of things that were in the first and second book that have been moving along but not quite resolved yet will get resolved in that book. And so I'm hopeful that in the next little while we'll have book 3 as well. So I'm really excited about that.
Well, we've had a great time speaking to the author of Emerson Page, Where the Light Leads, and somebody who's going to be back on the show in the not-too-distant future to celebrate book 3. Our guest has been Christa Avampato. Christa, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jed. It's always such a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Are you looking for a creative way to bond with your kids? Let me tell you all about Drawing with Your Kids, the ultimate destination for artistic adventures. Join us as we dive into the wonderful world of children's books with renowned illustrators guiding you step by step. From beloved characters to whimsical scenes, unleash your imagination and create cherished memories together. Whether you're a seasoned artist or just picking up a pencil, there's something for everyone at Drawing with Your Kids. Please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com, and click on the Drawing with Your Kids link at the top of the page and let the creativity flow. Drawing with Your Kids, where every stroke brings stories to life. Join us right now from the great state of Arkansas. Our guest is here today to celebrate her brand new picture book. Is called The Red Ball, A Friendship and Forgiveness. Please welcome to the show, Healey Ikerd. Hey, Healey, how are you?
Hi, Jed. How are you? I'm doing great. Thank you.
I am feeling fantastic, living the dream here in Boston, and I can't wait for you to tell us all about The Red Ball.
Yeah, The Red Ball is a story of friendship and forgiveness. It's actually based on a story my mom told me of her growing up. She grew up in East Germany in the 1940s and 50s. And so I ended up writing one of her stories down and kind of tweaked it a little because, you know, you got to have a little. She just had a happy ending to her story, and this one, not so much.
You know, I think there's a lot of people who forgot and who never knew that Germany spent a long time being separated.
Yes, it is a very interesting history. I looked more, I knew a little bit just because of my mom, but as I wrote the story, I studied it a little bit more and found it very intriguing because I was like, how did a country actually divide? But just learning, you know, after the war, the different countries came in and tried to help them rebuild. And Russia helped the side of East Germany rebuild, and that ended up being, they turned that into a communist country. Mm-hmm. So West was helped by France and the U.S. and maybe Great Britain, I can't remember. But, yeah, so they were helped a little bit better.
Yeah. You know, I once in my life, in one period in my life, I spent a month working at a retail store in Boston at Christmas time. So I was one of the thousands of people who came in and worked for a month to beat the Christmas rush. And that year, I believe it was 1988 or 1989, I was selling pieces of the Berlin Wall.
Wow.
When the wall came down, the people broke it up and some entrepreneurs came in. And if the certificate of authenticity that came in the box was right, it was actually pieces of the Berlin Wall and not part of a pothole in downtown Boston. But it was such an amazing moment in history. And now that the country has been reunited, it's great to see that friendships have been renewed and forgiveness has come to Germany.
Yes. Well, my mom actually, she was able to leave East Germany before the wall went up, but when it was still like you weren't supposed to leave. Mm-hmm. So she escaped, basically hidden, and pretended she was going to see a relative and didn't go back. So she was kind of the scandal of the town there when she didn't come back. But yeah, that was a pretty exciting part of history to see that, especially my grandmother was there in East Germany, and she passed before the wall came down. But anyway, it's a very, and that was the story, just growing up in a communist country like that. There was very little to eat, to have, to, use. So it was a very interesting part of history. And my book starts off pretty detail oriented in the sense that I really wanted to convey part of her story of not having much and the things that they had to do to live. Excuse me. And just how grateful she was still. That is all her story, that how grateful she was to have the things that she had, even though it wasn't much. So this ball that she gets, her grandmother sends it to her, and she is like so excited, over the top, because she only had 3 toys in her life growing up. And so this ball was a very special part of her life, and she got to share that with all the neighborhood kids, because of course they were in the same boat. Not many had toys, and if they did, they were things, that they would make or something. But a ball was a big deal, and her happy ending was that, every day before and after school and during, recess time, they would play with the ball together. My story, one of her friends ends up taking the ball, and so she has to work through, in the story at least, she has to work through that part of trying to figure out how to handle what happens when a friend does something to hurt you. And so that's the part she's working through. My mom's kind of funny because I told her I was going to write this story back a few years ago. And so when I added this part that wasn't part of her story, she's like, well, that's not my story. I'm like, I know, but you can't just get a ball and it be a happy ending. So she always laughs about that part.
So I'm assuming in the book we find some forgiveness for the girl who took the ball. Why is it so important for you to talk to kids about forgiveness?
Yes, she has to actually work through her friend Willie was the one who took the ball, and she gets very angry at him, and she feels like she's really justified in that anger. And oftentimes we can feel that way as well. What happens is that she is kind of going through her days very angry. And I think that we can relate to this a lot when somebody wrongs us, that we also can feel that anger and kind of justified in that. What happens if that anger runs long term, though, is it turns into bitterness and can make you not a nice person, or at least very negative person. And so I really wanted to introduce the concept to kids, because I don't think that we or they maybe even completely understand what forgiveness is really laying aside the anger and choosing kindness instead. And that is what she learns to do through the story. And so I think the message is important for children and for adults, that we can, even when things aren't fair or someone's betrayed us, that we actually choose the relationship. At least in the story, she could still choose the relationship and be reconciled in that, and not become that bitter person. In real life, not all relationships can be reconciled, but the forgiveness aspect is still an important one to have and to possess, and to kind of help it to become a part of us, so that we're not easily offended and then carry around that offense all the time, because it's not helpful to our mental health, and it's not actually helpful for our physical body either. Research has shown that forgiveness helps us a lot mentally, emotionally, and physically. So it's a really important thing to practice in our everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. There's lots of studies that reinforce what you just said, that being able to forgive people not excuse people or not, totally accept somebody hurting you, but being able to forgive and let go of the anger and the hurt is so, so important for our physical, for our mental health. I think it's also important for us to learn how to forgive ourselves sometimes.
Yes, that is an important part. I mean, especially if we're going to, again, be mentally healthy, that is, we need to possess it for not just others, but for ourselves. And sometimes for some people, it does become easier to forgive others than themselves. But, we have to remember that we too do the best that we can. We don't make decisions typically, out of evil intent. Like sometimes we just make mistakes. Sometimes we just choose a wrong decision. Later we can recognize it's wrong. But I think being a forgiving person and being able to forgive ourselves and just kind of living that helps us to be a little bit more humble, and it just makes life, you just have a better outlook. It's a good place to be for sure.
Yeah, yeah. What was, I know you said that your mom said, hey, that's not my story, and she accepted the embellishment here and the editorial decisions. That was great. But what did she think about her book, her story, her life being kind of spotlighted in a children's book?
She, I think, has really loved it. I think she was a little skeptical because of the embellishment at first, but she has really, I think, come to embrace it and really loved when I would call her and say, is this something that would happen then? Is this something that might happen? And tell me more about that. And so she really liked sharing her story. And so when the book was able to, it was released in February, February, March, and her birthday is in February. So before it was actually released, I had wrapped up the book and gave it to her. And she read it and cried, and she was really, part of it's probably being proud of her daughter
Mm-hmm.
have written a children's book, but the other part was just that her story's there. And, I don't know. There's something about stories that are powerful, but when it's our own story too, and it's in print, that's powerful too, to think, wow, other people are going to read my story, and hopefully they can appreciate it and how it kind of lives on beyond that. So, yeah, she was pretty touched about it.
That's really neat. You're mentioning your mom shedding a few tears when she saw the book and held it in her hands. I'm imagining there's some parents who are reading the Red Ball to their kids might tear up too at some point when they are sharing this message of forgiveness and the importance of forgiveness, and are reminded that there might be some people in their lives that they need to forgive.
I hope so. I think we all need the message of forgiveness constantly. I'm a licensed counselor in my full-time job, and I am always looking for resources to teach children concepts in unique ways, and I love storytelling as a way to introduce something. But I do believe that most people probably hold some unforgiveness of somebody or themselves, and I hope that that is what they can learn from the book, that they not only can choose the action of forgiveness as a skill, mental health skill of, dealing with anger, but also that it helps them become the person that they want to be anyway. Nobody wants to be bitter and angry and negative and those sort of things. People want to be a person of joy and of kindness and compassion and trying to understand somebody else. And yes, not agreeing with something they did, not excusing that, but recognizing the hurt. And I don't need to carry that anymore. I can let that go. And at least in Renata's case of forgiving Willie, she was able to do that in a way that helped him save some face also. So.
Yeah, so important. You mentioned that you're a counselor, and we've talked here on the podcast a lot about the benefits of reading with our kids, and certainly the benefits are myriad. There's so many benefits, but from a psychological and emotional, can you address some of the benefits that we get in terms of our mental health when we read with our kids? Not only benefits that the kids get from that reading together, but also that the adults experience.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I have when I started counseling with children, and that's kind of where I started my career, was counseling with children. I found that was one of the best ways to bond with them, to create relationship, to build rapport, was to read them a story. And I have never had a child turn down my offer to read a story. So even if their parents never had, they always say yes to that. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity, too, as we read stories, and normally parents will ask questions during the story and, kind of engage in parts of the story of what's relatable, that's creates great opportunities to talk about things and maybe even bring up some things that the child hadn't even shared with the parents. So not only, I think, just creating some bonding, but gives opportunities to share other things that maybe they haven't got to talk about, or give the parent an opportunity to learn, or reference back when they, when they're dealing with something in life of like, oh, we can remember that story, and, mom needs to do this now, or, so it creates some good. And that, in essence, is good for mental health, because we need those sorts of things in our life to feel love, to feel reassurance, to feel confident and brave. And those things help our mental health. It helps as we learn and see, you'll see a host of emotions throughout the book of the Red Ball, and through that gives opportunities, I hope, for parents to talk about ways to handle the different emotions, and that obviously is good for mental health too, of learning how to express those, seeing how other people express those, what are good ways to handle emotions, what are not so good ways to handle emotions. So just that creates good mental health also. So I think anytime parents and children are talking and expressing themselves in healthy ways and talking about ways to do that, that is good for mental, emotional, and physical health.
Yeah, I agree. I'm always advocating to parents to use some sneaky techniques with their kid. If a kid, a suspected kid is having an issue, maybe they're having trouble forgiving their sibling about something, that you can kind of, and they don't want to talk about it, you can pick up a book like The Red Ball and read it, and you're not talking about them and their situation, but the kids are getting the message. And I think that kind of sneaky parenting is okay, but I'm just a dopey guy doing a podcast. You're a professional. Do you give it your thumbs up too?
I think that's an excellent way. And I think sometimes, I often say, if people have a hard time with something, like hearing the, correction or something, even in marital relationships, that sometimes it's best just to, like in this story, read the story and just leave it as a gift for them in their lap, so that they can process on their own about that. And then later you might bring it up again, but sometimes it's better not to say it outright. There's a belief in therapy that sometimes stories, without even sharing anything, can be very therapeutic. Just hearing specific kinds of stories can be helpful, and not even asking questions, engaging, learning, or, intentional learning of the concepts of just reading the story and letting it sit. Mm-hmm. I call it a gift because we just give the story and let it be what it is. And then they take it how they want to. Mm-hmm. And so like in marital relationships, if we need to say something, we can just say something like, I miss you, and leave that as a gift. And they take it how they want to, or whatever the thing is, instead of saying, you never spend time with me, something like that.
It's just fighting doesn't do anything. It might make you feel good in the moment. I got a little bit of angst out, but long term, it doesn't work.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I really wanted to do, again, my counselor comes out in me, but I created a companion book to go along with the regular book to basically reinforce some of the concepts. And one of the sections in there is about emotions and just how to specifically, what are some good coping skills for anger? What are some not so good coping skills? And then being able to identify emotions, trying to identify different emotions in the story. There's a section on forgiveness and trying to just reinforce some of the concepts that hopefully kids have learned. And maybe they will notice that I'm trying to teach them, and maybe they'll just think it's fun. Mm-hmm. As I ask them the question, like, what's a good coping skill for anger? And I have this whole list of, shouting, relaxing, taking deep breaths, whatever. So,
one of the things we've talked about in the podcast is that a lot of kids do have a hard time understanding and identifying emotions. And a lot of kids and a lot of adults, if they experience disappointment or a loss, a lot of those feelings come out as anger. As you were speaking, I'm thinking maybe a good way to help kids is to, when they're expressing that anger, just ask them, who would you need to forgive? And if they realize, well, there's no one to forgive, no one did anything wrong to me, it's like, well, this feeling is different than anger. And okay. But again, I'm just a dope. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, I like to often ask when they're having, especially anger, because a lot of people in the field of psychology believe that anger is a secondary emotion. And I think I could probably argue either way. I think it can be primary and it can be secondary. But often we'll find it as a secondary emotion when we look, like, what are we really feeling behind that? Because sometimes, like, when people get embarrassed, they'll get mad. I mean, just because anger is a little bit more socially acceptable than sadness or embarrassment or, frustration or something, you can just pop off and be done with it all. But it's not healthy to do that. And then often there are consequences that come too from that. So if you do punch somebody because you're upset, like, now you've got a whole slew of consequences when really it was just embarrassing that they said something about you, and learning how to handle that. So often in counseling, when I first am counseling with kids, that's normally the first thing that we do is we're doing different exercises and interventions on all the feelings and what those are. I had a child once that was convinced he never felt angry. It was all happiness. And it took me probably a good year to get him to just identify and accept that other feelings are okay. We just manage them well and learn how to handle them, but that not everything's happiness and we don't need to pretend like it is. And that's kind of what he had learned to do in his unhealthy environment was just I've just got to be happy. And it's like, it's okay we don't want to go around, hitting things, but we can express that something is disappointing or something makes us angry. That's okay. So, yeah.
Great lessons, and what a great way to start having a conversation about forgiveness with our kids and how that is important with our friends. Tell us where we can go to find out more about the Red Ball and find out more about you.
Well, the Red Ball is on Amazon and all the online retailers. If you're interested in autograph copy, you can get one through my website. You can just reach out to me and we can arrange that. Or my website is writtenbyhealey.com, and my first name is spelled Healey. So writtenbyhealey.com. And so I've got more information than you'd ever want to know about me on there. I've got some free resources for parents. And, if you're interested in, just a sheet of activities or something, that's like, if you don't want to purchase the companion book and just want a few free resources, just reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help. That is kind of my thing. I love to help and encourage people and help people live as healthy lives as they can. So
that's beautiful. I hope we'll have a follow-up to the Red Ball so you can have an excuse to come back on the podcast.
I would love that. And I have already written the second, another story that my mom gave me. Again, it's, embellished somewhat, but, yes. So
all right.
Hopefully we'll get to see you again.
We'll look forward to that. We've had a great time speaking to the author of The Red Ball, a story of friendship and forgiveness. Our guest has been Healey Ikerd. Healey, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Jed, for having me. I appreciate it.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guests, Christa Avampato and Healey Ikerd. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Chris Doherty, Judy Hu. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all of her support, but most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.